It's a very daunting task to make a video on the entirety of a series, especially one I hold so dear in my heart. Berserk is one of, if not the most beautiful story I've ever read, and maybe even ever told, but no one can read everything, so I won't make that claim. But making a video that captures its brilliance is a task that has taken me much more time than I would have preferred, but I am happy to give it the time it deserves because that's how special it is. When Miura died, I must admit that I felt about as sad as I do every time I see a celebrity death in the news, and that's that I wasn't very sad that he passed away. I mean, not more than anyone else that I hear dies. I simply didn't have a close connection to him as a human being. I don't know his voice, his mannerisms, his personality. I've only seen a few pictures of him, so I wasn't very sad that he died. More than anything, I was saddened that he wouldn't finish the story, which touched my heart so much. I know that the story was born of the man, and that there's no story without the man, but for me, the story has transcended the man and become something that will immortalize him, not as Kentaro Miura, but as the author of Berserk. I don't mean to diminish the importance of any human being. I just didn't know him. I knew his work. And I am grateful that he wrote it. I will not be able to cover the entirety of all the meaning in Berserk in this video. No one could in the limited amount of time of a single video, but I'll talk about the themes and ideas that the final chapter of the entire story that we'll ever get, written by Kentaro Miura, reminded me of. So without further ado, I present to you the moral philosophy of Berserk. Humanity can be awful. I know that I don't need to tell of you that. Every day we can read something on the paper, or more accurately online, that shows us humanity's infinite potential for horrors. We like to think that the people who commit such actions are evil or monsters because it scares us that human beings like ourselves can commit such acts. Those labels are reductions that help us feel better. We can call them evil in a binary way to avoid thinking about why they do the things that they do. Because asking why could make us see parts of ourselves that we don't want to see, or that we wouldn't want others to know about. Every apostle in Berserk was once a human being just like us. The only difference is that they had a desire or compulsion that overpowered their self-control and drove them to abandon their own humanity to achieve it. One thing that I often think about is that despite their horrifying new appearances, monster strength, and appetite for human flesh, demons are still clearly humans deep down. They yearn, they anger, they hurt, and they fear, among many other negative and even sometimes positive human emotions. If they are monsters, it's not because of their monstrous abilities, but because of the human's own very monstrous heart. All of us, to some extent, have a part of us that is evil. Whether cold and meticulous, or passionate and sudden, there is some amount of evil desire in all of us. That if we had access to power, real power, we might give into. Even if deep down you're a really good person, if you're honest with yourself, there's probably something, at least somewhat despicable, that you do if you really had the power to do so. Or like, if you don't find it despicable, others might. Or in some cases, you do some despicable things to have real power. If you want to create real positive change, you may think that there's only a violent ways to do it. Really, it doesn't matter how big it is or big or small it is. Everyone has some part of it like that. Some lust compulsion that draws you and is ultimately what you like to do. Maybe not all the time, but sometimes part of you wants to do something that you know isn't completely right. The point is that odds are you have it, I have it, everyone has it. But what separates the humans from the demons, from the apostles, is our ability to not give into those potentially evil desires, You may long for sex, but you wouldn't force anyone to do it with you. You may long for riches, but you wouldn't steal. You may long to be the best, but you wouldn't do it by killing everyone better than you. Demons are those who do not restrain their own desires, and who try to please themselves without care for what happens to others. These are the people who become apostles, who sacrifice their loved ones for petty desires, who could be considered evil, and who ultimately are weaker than everyone else. It is that weakness in some or every aspect of their lives that drives them to seek this power over others, so that they can pursue their desires without repercussions. And that is the story of Griffith. In almost every way, Griffith was the most impressive person in the world. A person of will incarnate. Everything he put his mind into, he succeeded in. But one day, he did not. That was when Griffith was defeated by Guts. Griffith, who was objectively better at everything else, lost on a single thing, and he lost his mind. Seeking to gain a prize right away to make himself feel better, instead of playing his perfect game as he had up until then, he went and slept with the Princess Charlotte. Because of that, he was stripped, tortured, and made an invalid. And in this pitiful state, he sacrificed all the people who had helped him along the way. That isn't strength to do what others would not. That's weakness. Strength is to weather the storm. Weakness is to push others off the boat so it won't sink as quickly. But that was just the sacrifice. When, to be frank, Griffith was physically weak and his prospects had all but dwindled. The thing to note is that Griffith was weak even before he was tortured and reduced to that. His ego was larger than anyone else's in the world, but it was so fragile that one singular defeat in his entire life broke it. That is a weak person. Someone who after one failure cannot endure and get back up. And that is the sort of weakness that every apostle had at the time they activated their own Belahit. They lacked the strength to weather the storm that is life. So they abandoned their humanity in order to cheat life and satisfy their desires. Probably you'll find that to some extent you have some of these desires and compulsions. The point of all of this being that these desires or compulsions that lead to ruin are very human. We lust, we can be overeager and destructive. We want something that is simply a fantasy. We want more time and we dream for greater things. All those things can lead to evil, are so commonly found in men that it is no wonder how humans can seem evil when evil can come from some of the most mundane desires. Yes, I do think that what Miura is saying is that within every human there is some amount of evil, but going beyond that, I believe he's also trying to show how within every demon, there is humanity. Human wants, human needs, human follies, and most importantly, human emotions. Griffith was born being no one and nothing. Still, he longs to be the greatest in the world and the most powerful. Yes, he wanted this castle, but that was just a metaphor for his infinite longing for greater and greater heights. He has it now, and he hasn't stopped. Really, what the small boy always wanted and always longed for was to soar higher and higher. But there is one other thing that we know he longs for, and that other thing is friendship. Sadly, that friendship that Griffith longs for is paradoxical to his dream, which means that ultimately he is a tragic figure who will have to give one up. You see, because of his greatness, Griffith believes that people cannot have any other reaction to him than either admiration or fear. To be the greatest in the world, he needs for every single person in the planet to either fear or admire him. The reason there's a paradox is that Griffith has a secondary longing for friendship. To him, a friend is, and I quote, someone who would never depend upon another person's dream, someone who wouldn't be compelled by anyone, but would determine and pursue his own reason to live. And should anyone trample that dream, he would oppose him body and soul, even if that threat were me, myself. What I think a friend is one who is my equal. And that's where this paradox and inevitable tragedy arises. Griffith wants to be the best, and he wants for there to be an equal to him. These are two naturally impossible ideas that simply cannot logically work together. You cannot be the singular best if there is someone equal to you. Similarly, Griffith needs everyone to either fear or admire him, but he also wants a friend who is not compelled by anyone. These again are also two mutually exclusive desires. He can never have both desires at the same time, and he is therefore doomed to never have all that he desires. That's what we see in the last chapter of the entire series. We see Griffith cry, perhaps not understanding his own desires, but feeling their emotional toll nonetheless. He can't quite understand why he has these feelings. He can only describe them. I had a dream that on nights with a full moon, I become an infant and I feel the embrace of a familiar warmth. But as I wake from that dream, only a feeling of loneliness remains, and that too takes but a moment to disappear, with a single teardrop, like the morning dew. Astute observers will remind me that these aren't really Griffith's emotions, rather the Moonlight Boy, who is Casca and Gus's child who was reincarnated into Griffith. I know it's complicated. And I will grant that, but only for the part about the embrace of a familiar warmth. You see, after he transforms and after he wakes from the dream, he is Griffith again. And as Griffith, he feels lonely, if only for a moment. At that moment, Griffith's hardened soul understands that he will truly never have everything he wants, even if not his mind, even if his brain doesn't understand. In this scene, in chapter 359, we see him disappear in the full moon to do what we now know is become the Moonlight Boy. But just before that, after having sex with the princess, I can't help but think that he looks sad and lonely. He may now be a monster, but monsters are still within our understanding. That doesn't mean we should or even can forgive him, but his soul is still one that's fundamentally human. That seems like a weird and long rant, but what does recognizing that the apostles have a human soul even mean for the philosophy of the series? Well, let's look at the scene between Irvine and Sonia. Sonia is frustrated because Griffith must be with Princess Charlotte, and there's no way that she can hold Griffith's attention. Sonia, that is. So, she goes to get warmth around a fire on which Irvine is sitting by his lonesome. They talk about Irvine's own lonely tendencies, and then Sonia tells her tale. Finally, Sonia falls asleep, and the literal demon wraps his coat around her, showing a warm side. These souls may have been transformed and forever altered, but they still have the same human characteristics. I believe what Miura is saying is that even demons have the capacity for good. And if that is true of the demons in the story, so should it be of those humans in the real world who we call evil or demons. We need to understand, and even sometimes sympathize. We should never dismiss them as unchangeable monsters because we know only of their evil deeds. Unlike the manga, life isn't black and white, and we can't be calling people evil and dismiss them as wholly so. Every person, every situation merits its own considerations. But that's one side of the coin. The side that has already given in. The side that has already committed at least one unforgivable act of evil for their desires. There's still the other side, the side which has yet to commit such an act, but is clearly not without sin. Many times in Berserk, we've seen the horrors that regular humans are capable of. What Donovan did to Guts. How Rosine and Jill were treated by the adults of their village. Not to mention all the horrible deeds at the Tower of Conviction, done both in the name of God and in opposition to him. None of these were so-called demons. None of them sacrificed their loved ones to satisfy their own desires. But they were still horrible acts. Unlike the apostles, these are not the weak who have to seek power. They can already do injustice and evil without needing the power of a demon. They could get what they wanted with their own power. They never needed demonic powers to achieve their goal. Somehow, these people are worse than the apostles. At least the apostles have admitted to leaving humanity these people still claim to be part of it. But again, they are human, whether horrible or not. It cannot be denied that their horrors come from human desires for pleasure, power, or some other kind of mistaken purpose. Every person is defined by their choices. All of us live on a knife's edge. On one side, we can do good and live for others as well as ourselves. On the other side, we can do evil and only live for ourselves. All of us have the potential for both. In a series about good and evil as well as strength and weakness, it's only fitting that our protagonist is one constantly teetering on that edge. In the beginning of the story, Gus is actually more on the evil side, choosing not to care about people and doing all for the purpose of achieving his revenge. He says some horrible things about how humans too weak to survive don't deserve to live, even once stating that the very thing that makes demons who they are, this thing about not stepping on the ants. Thankfully, he starts to find people in his journey that return to him what he'd lost, people who are able to survive along with him in this world. By the end of the conviction arc, he's allowed people to travel with him and even relied on the help of others, but he still struggles with his own violence and rage. Hatred is where those who can't look sorrow in the eye wander off to. God still cannot accept what happened, and honestly, it is a question whether any person ever could. But for him to finally be the man he wants to be, he has to move on and let go of his rage. I don't know how the story would have unfolded, which side of the knife Guts would have fallen into. It sure would be hard to live a peaceful life while still having the brand, but that surely is what he should seek. Waging war against the demons in Griffith is just an unwinnable battle. The only ones human, not apostle, who can fight them had to give up their own humanity just to attempt it. Even the Berserker armor, the only tool Guts has to reliably fight the strong apostles, takes away Guts' own humanity and foments his rage. One ominous omen in the series is that Guts is the holder of a Belahit, keeping the possibility of his own accession technically alive as the ultimate final step in giving into his rage. I don't think it would ever happen, but the story has left it open-ended. Or, unless, Puck gets the Belahit. Will Guts use his sword to protect? Or will he use it to let out his rage? Would he ever be able to accept what happened to him? We might never get to know what Miura had in store. But what is certain is that it would have been something about our own struggles with doing good and evil. It takes strength to deal with the harsh realities of life and rise above them. If we fall into despair, we'll do things which we wouldn't be proud of. Again, we don't know what Guts will do, but we do know what he has done. Even when Guts was acting like a demon in the Black Swordsman arc, we still saw his sadness and sympathy. We were able to recognize his cynical attitude as a coping mechanism for the unfairness of this world, which surpassed human reason. He learned from his mistakes in the past, realizing how he shouldn't have abandoned Casca at any time. He also learned to rely on others, even after being betrayed by one of the closest people to him. I believe that Guts won't give in. There's no one stronger than him. No one who has had so many awful things personally happen to him and keep their true nature intact. Even if there were times where he waned off the path, in the end, he always put himself on the right road. Will he live in peace or die? Who knows? But I believe he will accept what happened to him and live a life that he and others could be proud of. One day he'll realize that he has gotten some new irreplaceable things. Friends like Puck, Furnice, Serpico, Shirka, and an apprentice, and maybe even many others like Roderick, for instance. He thought he'd lost everything, but still found what he was looking for before the eclipse, a place where he belongs. That is actually the opposite ending that I expect for Griffith. No matter how much he achieves, he will never be satisfied, and he'll never be with someone who is his equal. One thing I love about Berserk is how angelic Griffith looks, whilst Guts looks somewhat barbaric and often evil. Obviously, these depictions hide the true reality of each person. In reality, the angel is one of doom, and the barbarian is one who loves and protects. But why are they like this? What led them in their lives to one be a villain, an angelic villain, and one a dark hero? That's because Griffith is a dream chaser. He cannot accept reality and his own limitations and situations. Guts does accept reality and his situations and his limitations. He confronted these realities head on. This makes Guts strong and Griffith weak. When you accept reality, you can be happy with anything. When you can't, you won't be happy even with everything. To recap, Berserk asks us to recognize that everyone is human, for better or for worse. Monsters are no more than humans whose depravity you're aware of, and whose warmth you have not seen. There is good and bad in all of us, but what allows us to draw the lines of our inner strengths, which teach us self-control and endurance of the horrors of reality. Life is about our struggle against ourselves, between our inherently conflicting desires. Staying strong and looking at life with clear eyes will allow us to see what's actually important. With that strength, we'll be able to see those things that are irreplaceable and give meaning to our lives. Berserk is filled with a litany of great quotes that, its dialogue can even often feel like poetry to me. But I'll leave you with one last quote from the story that I believe encapsulates Guts as a person, and what I believe is the ultimate lesson in what is important to be strong and good that Kentaro Miura is trying to teach us. And that's the following. A good sword, even if it rusts and dulls, has good steel that never rusts left over in the wick. That steel is the ultimate steel. Even if it cracks, if you return it to the fire, it's sure to be reborn.
So when I crash,